What's up, chooms? This video is the first entry of our series on Tales of the Red, a collection of published adventures for Cyberpunk Red. In this playlist, I'm gonna examine each adventure individually. We'll start from an overview of the events, the tale. Then we're gonna move on to some advice on running the scenario and finish off with a critical evaluation of the adventure. Of course, there will be plenty of spoilers ahead, so if you are a player and you wish to play this scenario in the future, well, just save this one for later. Okay, so without further ado, let's start with the first scenario in the series, A Night at the Opera. A Night at the Opera is an investigation scenario leading to a final showdown with a cool cyberpsycho. It has a good mix of combat, roleplay, and exploration, although the investigation part of the scenario is probably the worst executed, as we shall see. First of all, let's start with an overview of the events that the scenario expects to take place. In role-playing adventures, each group always has a different experience, although this one is kinda railroaded, so it could play out as written in some cases. The story begins with the characters being tasked with investigating the kidnapping of Lucy Ryan Mayer, the daughter of a Rocklin Augmentics hotshot, and possibly to save her. Lucy is only the last in a series of seemingly interlinked kidnappings in the university district. In the last month, 7 young women disappeared from the area. The NCPD wasn't able to shed any light on what happened. As it turns out, the only clue the characters have is that the kidnappings have the same modus operandi, which can be traced to the Philharmonic Vampires, a prankster gang operating in the university district. When any other means to contact the gang proves useless, the Edge Runner attend a play in Symphony Hall, where Philharmonic Vampires are enacting a modernized version of Bram Stoker's Dracula, with buckets of blood poured on the spectators. The opera is cut off quite abruptly by some shots behind the scenes. Then, the assailants appear on stage, guns blazing. They are the clown and the monk, 2 lieutenants working for the final boss of this scenario, Lord Ruthven. The crowd erupts in a panicked flight, blocking the PCs inside, where they have no choice but to defend themselves. Their attack is not against them, but some shots target them nonetheless. After fighting alongside the Philharmonic Vampires, the Edge Runners win the fight. The clown and the monk flee the Symphony Hall, if they survive. The Philharmonic Vampires take note of the PC's help, but their boss, the Master, sends them away, for the moment, being too distraught from the death of his children. But before that, he mentions that he might get in touch with the PCs later. The PCs are then given some time to rest. Then, they receive an invitation to meet with the Master at the Symphony Hall, where he tells them the whole story. As it turns out, the man behind the kidnappings is Lord Ruthven, a former member of the Philharmonic Vampires turned cyberpsycho. The crazy man now thinks he's a real vampire and has started acting like one. The Master gives the PCs the location of Lord Ruthven's lair in South Night City and asks them to kill the cyberpsycho for their mutual interest. The Master is actually the one who hired the PCs in the first place, pretending that the job was paid by Lucy's concerned father. And if you ask why, the reason is that he didn't want to draw too much attention on the vampires. But the PCs may never find out about this. Alternatively, the PCs may learn about Lord Ruthven if they investigate his office in Night City University, where Ruthven used to be a psychology professor. Here, the PCs can find clues pointing to the fact that Ruthven was obsessed with Barbara Doll, the M54 evening news presenter. Ruthven even went as far as to kill the woman's husband. Frustrated by the impossibility to get her, he made up for that by kidnapping young female students at the university with even the slightest resemblance to the object of his obsession. So, this is why Ruthven kidnapped all these women, to bioscope them into Barbara Doll and create his own personal harem of vampiric wives. Please note that the PCs may never visit the university, but even if they do, they'll probably still need to meet with the Master, since they have no clue on where to find Ruthven now, since his professor persona has been missing for quite a few days now. After preparing as needed, the PCs head to the Union Chapel in South Night City. This is basically Lord Ruthven's lair. Here, they find the clown and the monk posted outside, if they survive the shootout at the Symphony Hall, along with other guards. the PCs can talk or fight their way into the deconsecrated chapel. As they arrive, they find a gruesome scene, with signs of torture everywhere in the place. This should reinforce the idea that whoever this Layers is has gone completely out of control. After climbing down some stairs lulled by some Tchaikovsky symphony coming from below, the PCs find two automated turrets disguised as people. As soon as the turrets are defeated, or while the edge runners are busy fighting them, Lord Ruthven makes his climactic appearance for a final showdown. There is no option to talk to him. He's gone too far into his madness. Assuming they can defeat the Cyber Psycho, the PCs can rescue Lucy Rhinemayer, who is shocked but alive. Sadly, there's nothing to be done about the other victims, although Lucy's family will pay for having them biosculpted back into the original looks before the burial. The PCs receive their reward, and if they off Lord Ruthven in a thematic or spectacular way, such as by decapitating him or drawing a stake right through his heart, they also win the favor of the Philharmonic Vampire. So, let's do a quick recap of the events, shall we? 1. The PCs are hired to solve a series of mysterious kidnappings. 2. The Edge Runners discover that the Philharmonic Vampires are the likeliest kidnappers. 3. The PCs visit the Symphony Hall to meet the vampires, but they are attacked by two of Lord Ruthven's lieutenants. 4. The Edge Runners help the vampires and meet their master, but are sent away. They can rest for a few days. 5. The PCs meet the master and are tasked with killing Lord Ruthven. 6. The Edge Runners reach the Union Chapel and have to make their way past some guards at the entrance, including the clown and the monk, if they survive. 7. The PCs find evidence of Ruthven's cruelty inside the chapel. 8. The Edge Runners are attacked by two automated turrets in the crypt. 9. The PCs fight Lord Ruthven. 10. The Edge Runners save Lucy Rhinemayer and get their reward. So, let's get to some GM's advice, shall we? This scenario really needs some to properly work. Let me start by saying that if you play the scenario as written, you're gonna have some troubles. Unless your players are just there to be railroaded along. The reasons that the scenario is sorely lacking in terms of both character motivation and connection between its parts. But let's start from the beginning. So, according to the scenario, the Master is the one who truly hires the PCs in the first place. Anyway, he doesn't want to draw too many attentions on the vampires, so he uses an intermediary. That's good enough. But the scenario goes further and tells you that the intermediary poses as a representative of Lucy's father, or Rockin' Augmentic's hotshot, so that the vampires are not suspected. The only thing I can see here is, why? Why to complicate things so much? I say just let the PCs be hired by a representative of Mr. Rhinemayer. His daughter has gone missing after all. As for the vampires, don't rely on the characters asking the NCPD or the University Guard for info. Some group might not want to do that. And there is no guide whatsoever to any line of investigation leading them to suspect the vampires. So just let Mrs. Rhinemeyer's intermediary mention that they suspect the Philharmonic Vampires, and that the PCs should attend one of their shows to investigate. Seems like there happens to be one scheduled for the next day after all. Very convenient, isn't it? Give a name to this intermediary and make them recognizable. I went with Mr. Yellow, a man with a distinct Belle Epoque look and a yellow glasses. Yep, I've been reading The King in Yellow of late. Don't worry about that. I didn't tell you nothing. And if I did, well, you didn't hear me mention any king. Okay? So, this intermediary should also help the PCs in their investigation. I suggest you use some of Sparky McNiven's ideas here to flesh out the investigation, since the scenario doesn't give you anything at all to deal with that. Let the characters delve a bit into Lucy's story before attending the show and meet the vampires. They could visit Lucy's room in the campus, for example. There's a likely path they could take, so prepare ahead and add some key elements. You can start with a personal diary, where Lucy notes that she plans to join the vampires out of fascination by their heart. Here she should mention her best friend and the man stalking her. You can also have her complain about her surgery professor being unreachable. These are all ways to get players and foreshadow some future events. You could also add a data pad, where more info about Lucy can be obtained. Many unanswered mails to her surgery professor. Some pics of previous Philharmonic Vampires shows. A few vids of she and Monica having a great time outside, and so on. Make Lucy feel like a real person. Oh, and she should also have a digital copy of Bram Stoker's Dracula. and maybe even some digital tickets for an upcoming show. You can have a picture of Lucy in the room, along with some medical school textbooks. The PCs can get access to the room thanks to the intermediary, who gives them a badge to enter the campus and perhaps even the key to the dorm room. The PCs may also want to pay a visit to Monica, Lucy's best friend. Very conveniently, she lives in the same building as Lucy, but she can be found attending classes in the morning. If the characters talk to Monica, they learn that Lucy was obsessed by the vampires and loved their shows. Monica is willing to give the characters the tickets Lucy bought for everyone, since no one is going to attend the show, given the situation. And Monica can confirm that the surgery professor is missing. See what we did there? The scenario doesn't really give the characters any reason to investigate Lord Ruthven's office at the university, except some rumors they may or may not come across in their investigations. So, we pointed them in the right direction. If you fear they might discover too much too soon, you can make the offices difficult to access. In the evening, the characters will be busy attending the show. Also, now we have a strong tie to the vampires, and a good reason for the PCs to attend their Dracula. Not just some NCPD suspicions. There's none of this in this scenario, and the community agrees that this part is very lacking. The PCs are tasked with investigating Lucy's disappearance, but they're just pointed to the Symphony Hall without any authentic motivation. You have to come up with some investigation paths of your own device if you want to fill the gap, or you can use the one I provided. Whatever works for you, but just don't railroad them to the Symphony Hall, please. Another thing I will change is to make Lord Ruthven a medical school professor, not a psychologist. His role is a medtech, after all, and this whole thing is based on biosculpting his victims through surgery, so I feel this is way more appropriate. The last big change I would suggest is to just have the master spill the beans to the characters after the fight at the Symphony Hall, especially if they helped in the fight. There's no reason to make the PCs wait, nor has the master any motivation to do so. If you want to gain some pace in your session, here's what you can do. After the fight against the clown and the monk, the master tells the characters about Lord Ruthven, gives them the location where they can find him, and asks them to kill him. In exchange, the PCs will get some additional reward. For example, they might earn the vampire's trust and call upon them in the future. Or they can simply get more eddies. I'd say 500 eddies each for a job well done. If they do so with a stake or by decapitating Lord Ruthven, maybe they bump this up to $800. This means that you're gonna scratch the whole spaghetti and inflammation scene and gain some tempo. If DPCs need to rest before visiting the chapel, let them do so. But let them be the ones who dictate the game's flow, not the NPCs. Now that we have dealt with the major issues, let's move on to some minor remarks. Despite what the scenario says, there's no need to make sure the clown and the monk survive the attack at the Symphony Hall. They play no crucial role in the following events. They are simply encountered as guards keeping an eye out for intruders at the entrance of the Union Chapel. But you can easily swap them with other NPCs if they're dead, or even remove them entirely from the game. That's not to say they should not flee the Symphony Hall and save themselves if they need to do that. I just want to point out that their survival is hardly pivotal to the plot. They just play the role of guardians to the entrance of the boss area with no unique actions involved, so if they died in the fight at Symphony Hall, no worries. So another thing I don't really like. This scenario hook is really bad. Why the Philharmonic vampires are suspected? What is this modus operandi of theirs? Use my suggestions instead. If you need more ideas and suggestions on this scenario, I will point you to two places. First is Seth Skorkowski's review of this scenario, and second is Sparky Medivend's one. You'll find links to both of them in the blurb down below. To be honest, this scenario has been a huge disappointment to me. I really liked the idea behind the story, and I'm a fan of gothic horror, so the themes got me hooked from the start. But the execution was, well, let's just say, I think the scenario, as written, is not good enough to be playable. With a round amount of work, it can truly shine because it has some very interesting scenes and the final boss is very cool, but you'll have to put in some work of yours. And while adding something personal is always a good thing with any scenario, even if it's just tailoring it to your group's preferences, well, a good scenario, at least in my opinion, should at least give you some ideas or elements to start with. Agents of Desire, the second scenario in Tales of the Red, for example, does just that perfectly. But The Night at the Opera, oh my god, it makes you do all the work, especially the investigation part. In some points, the scenario is needlessly complex, for example in the whole intermediary game, or when it forces the PCs to leave the Symphony Hall without any real piece of information just to have them come back later. So the pacing is quite bad too. The best part of A Night of the Opera is the NPCs design for me. I love them. Even the two lieutenants as the clown and the monks are very interesting and has cool backstories and nice art. Lord Ruthven himself plays awesomely. In my game, the PCs ended up fleeing from him, taking the fight in the area outside the Union Chapel, the rain pouring down the night sky. The exec's driver came drifting and just ran over the Cyberpsycho, turning the odds. The group kept fighting desperately until the exec drove a stake into the Lord Ruthven's heart while leaning out of the car window. The maps are also quite good, and they both are useful for the combat scenes. However, the chapel's first floor is completely different from its description in the test. I mean, they don't even seem the same room. So, in conclusion, I would not recommend the scenario to a new GM. It needs a lot of work to properly function, so if you are just starting out with Cyberpunk, definitely try something else, despite what Tales of the Red itself says. The book advises you to start from A Night at the Opera, but I disagree. This scenario is one you should come back to once you're willing and able to put some work into it. If you're an experienced GM, however, you can roll with it. So I don't recommend A Night at the Opera to anyone who just wants to run a scenario as written or is new to the game. But I recommend it to anyone who is willing to put in some work and time to make it better. In that case, it can truly shine because the story is good and the NPCs are very well designed, in my opinion. Also consider the themes and see if your group is okay with them. There is a lot of physical abuse in this one, and violence against women is a dominant motive. Make sure everyone at the table is comfortable with those themes before running A Night of the Opera. In the end, playing this scenario has been very fun to me. I had to fill in a lot of gaps, but it all worked out well in the end. It's not a bad scenario, just one you should put some work into. Just don't expect much help from the scenario itself in doing so. But hey, I think this scenario has enough strength to make it worth the effort of improving it with your own hands. After all, what we wouldn't do to tell a good story.